Joining me today on the Capital TV show from the University Club, Alberto Miguel Fernandez. He's former U.S. diplomat and Vice President of MEMRI and former President of Middle East Broadcasting Network. We are so delighted to have you, Alberto, and I follow you on Twitter, and I'm so excited to have you on my show.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be on with you, Maria.
Your latest tweet was, American proxy wars for liberalism and against illiberalism are waged by a democratic administration cheered in the Times, boosted by big tech and propagandist by Hollywood. Can you explain?
Well, that was not something that I said. It's a quote from an article which Sohrab Ahmadi wrote. And I think he's trying to capture a moment in how the U.S. sees itself and the U.S. sees it in the world. His idea is that the United States used to, be in a struggle against communism, against enemy ideologies, but today America is kind of an empire that promotes its own ideology, an ideology which combines certain views on politics, equality, race, gender, etc.
Yeah, you can speak Arabic a little bit. From here, how do you assess the way of this administration is working, especially toward the Middle East? And Senator Bill Cassidy slammed Joe Biden yesterday for abandoning American jobs and also energy production by lifting sanctions on Venezuela oil.
Well, I'm not an admirer of this administration, so you're not going to hear any positive about it from me. But I think the senator's point about Venezuela is fascinating, because what you have is this administration came in with this discourse, you may remember, of democracy against autocracy, right? And they talked about this and did a show about it and held an event in Washington. Here they are empowering an autocracy, the Venezuelan regime, a dirty, corrupt, narco-leftist regime. Why are they doing it? They're doing it for one reason, and that is to use it against Russia, as part of the administration's focus on the whole Russia-Ukraine thing.
Because of the oil crisis?
Because of the oil crisis. And because the administration tends to be left of center, and so doesn't have a huge problem with leftist regimes in Latin America, whether they be Venezuela or Cuba. The Venezuelan regime it's like Lebanon was when Assad had 20,000 troops in Lebanon. It's a cow, it's a creature that is in the pocket of the Cuban regime.
Let's talk about Russia. You said it's supposed to be some nuclear arms negotiations, and it was postponed, these talks. It took place this week, but there is something went on. So can you explain why this negotiation is on hold right now?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm not a Russia hand, I'm not a Russia expert, but obviously there's this whole delicate process going on. There's a war, the Russia-Ukraine war going on. The United States is a near participant in it. It's a proxy participant in this war by supporting Ukraine. And so everything else related to Russia and the West, Russia and the United States, is in the shadow or connected somehow to that thing. So they are either, dice on a chessboard or on a checkerboard, or things to be used as part of the kind of political military confrontation between Russia and the United States.
Do you think that the war in Ukraine will end, and how?
All wars end.
That's good. Good news.
There's no doubt about that. Obviously, I don't think anybody knows. It certainly has been a very bloody and destructive war. You've seen discourses. You've seen both discourses. You've seen people who said early on, this is going to be an easy Russian victory, very simple, and they're going to win very easily. And then you saw for a very long time a kind of, this is going to be an easy Ukrainian victory. Ukraine is going to win. Russia is going to fall. Putin is going to be defeated. In such situations, we don't know what's going to happen. I think it's a very dangerous, destabilizing destabilizing situation. It could go in one of many different ways, and nobody knows at this point.
Is the Biden administration benefiting from this situation?
Yes.
How?
Absolutely. Well, it costs the U.S. money. However, the U.S. has a lot of money. I mean, it hurts American taxpayers in the long run, but in the short run, nobody can outspend the Americans. So the U.S. is able to inflict tremendous damage on Russia through a proxy. That's number one. Number two, the U.S., which is the world's largest, we talk about the Middle East, the U.S. is the world's largest oil producer, right? Mm-hmm. Bigger than Saudi Arabia, bigger than Russia. The U.S. is the world's largest oil producer. The U.S. is benefiting, for example, from European need for oil, European need for natural gas. Yeah. So the U.S. is actually making money off of the war. Now it has, of course, other effects. It leads to inflation worldwide, including in the United States. But certainly when it comes to damaging an adversary, that's happening. And when it comes to making money, that's happening. And the third thing, I think it's shown the weakness of the Europeans and the dependence that Europe has on the United States.
Well, about Iran, why they are praising Iran right now, and the talks in Vienna, is it gone?
Well, I mean, this is one of the problems with this administration, is it came in with this very naive view, which came from the Obama years, which continued in the Biden years, that Iran needed to be appeased, that Iran needed to be welcomed in, that there needed to be an equilibrium in the Middle East, and that Iran's equities, its interests in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, the Gulf, needed to be recognized and somehow coddled. This is, of course, a disastrous idea. And so...
But it works. Some people believe that JCPOA, when it was signed, it helped to spread peace. Well,
some people believe that, but think about what happened with the JCPOA. The JCPOA existed. Iran got some money, some benefit from it. Iran also used that money to develop its ballistic missile capacity and its drone capacity. And today, what do we see? The West, the Americans, complaining about Iranian drones being used in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the West. When the JCPOA was being arrived at, it's the Americans in the West, the Europeans, who decided that the nuclear issue was to be separated from ballistic missiles, drones, and Iran's role in the region, the Iran's aggression in the region. Well, we're living that today. So we have the bitter fruit of the JCPOA is seen on the battlefields of Ukraine. This is a result of U.S. policy of coddling Iran from the Obama administration and now the Biden administration.
The demonstrations now going on, where it will lead?
Well, unfortunately, I am, on the one hand, hopeful. My heart is with the Iranian people in the streets. I want them to succeed. I want to see the fall of the mullah regime. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think maybe I am a realist, having seen so much in the region and elsewhere. Dictatorships have a way of being able to crush the people. In the street. We've seen this in Cuba. We've seen this in Iran. We've seen this in Sudan. We saw it in Lebanon and in Iraq with the masses that demonstrated against the pro-Iranian regimes. So unfortunately, while I hope that the people on the streets win, I want them to win. I am with them. I'm a little pessimistic because I've seen so many times where brute force has won, at least temporarily.
Some people or some analysts say that if United States want this regime to fall, it will fall. in the same day when there is a decision.
Yeah.
So are they now, we can say that Iran and US are on the same boat, in the same track?
There's always, in the Middle East, there's always a little bit of exaggeration about this. If the Americans wanted hate, it would happen,
Yeah.
It's not exactly that way. I think.
But now this is an opportunity. The people are against the regime, the oppressive regime.
Yes, I think that the best thing would be for the United States to be fully with the people against the regime. But some people want to deal with the regime because of the nuclear file until now. Some people in the West, some people in the administration.
Yeah.
So they know that if they completely go with the people, if they adopt a policy of maximum pressure, that they'll lose the opportunity to have some kind of deal with the regime.
You are one of the top specialists in public diplomacy, and of course you have a big experience by leading one of the biggest broadcasts, يعني الحرة. How do you feel about the point of view or the perspective, American perspective towards the Middle East? Is still, until now, the Middle East important for Americans or American foreign policy?
Well, it is. There's no doubt that it's important, but the trend has been over the last 3 administrations, beginning with Obama, to try to find a way to distance the United States from the region. In other words, there's a kind of consensus, not just on the left, saying Obama, on the Democratic side, but also to some extent on the Republican side, that basically wants to wash its hands from the region. It says the region is always problems. The region costs American money, costs American lives without any benefit. So there's a kind of tendency to want to, the pivot to Asia, pivot to peer-to-peer confrontation with China and with Russia. So many people in the West and in the United States would love to kind of wash their hands from the Middle East and kind of let the Middle East go its own way. Whatever happens there, it's not important to us. But then things happen and it winds up being important again.
Some say if we cannot withdraw from the Middle East because the Middle East will follow us. So,
to a certain extent, there is something to say for that. For example, we've seen with the Ukraine crisis, the Ukraine war, how something which is in one part of the world, it's a local war involving 2 countries, right? And yet it's had a global effect in many, many different ways. So that's the danger, is, for example, an Iranian war against Saudi Arabia or an Iranian war against Israel tomorrow. This is a regional conflict that would have global ramifications.
You wrote recently that Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was Qatar's Islamist empire builder.
Yeah.
Why? How?
Well, I write, a weekly piece or bi-weekly piece for memory, and so I'm always writing on interesting things or things that are happening. So that piece was after Dr. al-Qaradawi died, and so many people wrote many different pieces about him, positive and negative. Yeah. What I wanted to write about in that piece was about the Qaradawi empire that was built with Qatari money. You had Qaradawi, the television star, on Al Jazeera. Yeah. Then you had Qaradawi, the internet influencer with IslamOnline.net, which was for a while the largest Islam-connected site in the world on social media. And then you had the International Union of Muslim Scholars, another Qaradawi. Well, obviously the objective is ideological colonization by Ikhwanji Islamist thinking. You also had the Fatwa and Research, European Fatwa and Research Council, another Qaradawi project. Qaradawi Ikhwanji, Muslim Brotherhood.
So you speak about Qatar's role in funding the Muslim Brotherhood all over the world.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's a kind of political decision that Qatar has made. that working with people that it values, like-minded people. So kind of the Islamist worldview, you could say the Muslim Brotherhood worldview is one that Qatar has embraced and seeks to support. Just as in the past some states maybe supported Salafism, Qatar is the great patron of the Muslim Brotherhood and Muslim Brotherhood-like organizations. Hamas in Gaza, the AKP Erdogan in Turkey, An-Nahda in Tunisia, wherever there's a kind of Islamist either political or political military or terrorist kind of initiative, they know that there are patrons in Qatar as well. When the Bashir regime was in power, for example, in Sudan, Qatar supported that regime as well.
He will do anything he can to develop a capability to defend the country. There are issues that he's reached out to Russia and China based on how much support we've given the UAE. Our foreign policy needs to be more real political, writes General Chuck Wald to Prolific Solutions. So he was talking about Mohammed bin Zayed, and he said his objective is to eliminate threats. Do you agree?
Yeah, of course. Look, I think that there are a lot of bad things in the Middle East. There is an axis of revolution led by Iran and its allies in the region. Assad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas. So there's this axis of constant revolt, constant destruction, constant revolution. There is another axis, which I think is an axis of reform. It's an axis of moderation. It's an axis of development, improving things, which is the UAE, which is Saudi Arabia, and those countries which are closer to them. So these are the two axes that I see in the region. Of course, I think the West and the United States should be with the axis of reform against the axis of revolution and destruction. Well, the Abraham Accords are very much part of the axis of reform.
Yeah.
I think people that see the region, that it needs to move out of the cycle of violence, revolution, destruction of countries. Look at Lebanon today, look at Syria today, look at the criminal theft in Iraq that we saw connected to these pro-Iranian mafias, and then you have countries that want to reform themselves, that want to improve their situation, that want to give their youth an education, to give them good jobs that you see in Saudi Arabia and you see in the UAE and in other places. So I think that any thinking person who is not an ideologue has to be, with all their faults, nobody's perfect. No country is perfect. The United States is not perfect. No regime is perfect. But there's a clear difference between reformists and Islamist revolutionaries. And we have to be with the reformists.
So do you think that the region with this Sunni regimes or the GCC countries that they are looking for the future of our generation, do you think that this is the right way, and this is how any administration should look at with appreciation, for example? Because because sometimes we see that this administration is demanding many things and looking for small things to criticize their country. They don't see the big view or the big achievements.
Well, I think certain things have happened. First of all, I think this administration has certain complexes or obsessions, right? And it tries to play out some domestic issues on a global stage, which I think is a problem. I think our policy should be based on working with our friends against our adversaries. We have historic strategic friends in the region, close allies in the region. We used to work closely with them. The estrangement that happened between the administration and Saudi Arabia or with the UAE or with other countries, even Egypt and others, is not in the interest of U.S. foreign policy. That doesn't mean we can't criticize our friends. We can do that behind the scenes. We can exert our influence. But the U.S. has to understand who its adversaries are and who its allies are in the region. And for some reason, this administration, that seems to be a difficult thing for this administration to understand.
My last question, how do you see the election 2024, your assessment for the midterm, between Ron DeSantis and Trump, Biden want to run again, so...
I don't think anybody knows. It's way too early. The U.S. Political system is very dynamic, very volatile. 2 years in an electoral season is an age. It's an eternity. I am originally from Florida, so I am a big admirer of Governor DeSantis, and I supported his re-election. So I'm very positive about him. But beyond that, nobody knows.
Albert Miguel Fernandez, thank you so much. I'm so happy to have you on my show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.